The Chaser Report is recorded on Gadigal land.
Striving for mediocrity in a world of excellence. This is the Chaser Report.
Hello and welcome to the Chaser Report with Dom and Charles.
And Charles, today it is time to praise Peter Dutton because people have been saying a deeply unfair thing about him recently.
Yeah.
They've been saying that the man has no policies.
Oh,
I
right.
read some snarky commentator this week, Charles, saying Scott Morrison didn't hold a hose, but does Peter Dutton hold a policy?
Ooh.
I'm here to tell you he has not just a policy, but one of the bravest policies in the history of Australian politics.
Are you saying that Peter Dutton is the Bill Shorten of the Liberal Party?
I'm saying that he's Bill Shorten multiplied by John Hewson. It is the most crazy brave thing I've ever seen. I'm not making this up. This isn't heavy-handed sarcasm.
And for listeners unfamiliar with the great text of the English language, bravery in politics is always bad. Right? Bravery is the thing that you never do.
It's the thing you never do. If you compare Bill Shorten with Albo, Shorten had a whole bunch of policies, including changes to tax. He was going to get rid of negative gearing. All this stuff, lost the election because they ran a negative campaign against him. As we know, John Hewson brought out Fight Back, this whole comprehensive tax plan that gave Keating the sweetest victory of them all. No one thought he would win, but he did because the opposition came up with policy that Keating could run against. So how brave is Peter Dutton for going to the next election with a plan for nuclear power, Charles? A plan to introduce nuclear power to Australia.
Look, I've actually got a theory about this, but I didn't realise it was the nuclear power one that we were going to talk about. I assumed it was some sort of potato-based policy.
Well, I'll explain in more detail after this. No, I wasn't building up for some sort of potato reveal. He's come up with what's increasingly looking like a detailed plan to bring nuclear power to Australia at scale, Charles.
Okay, so can I just tell you, and I feel a little bit like, Blackadder telling Baldrick here, but there might be just a tiny little problem with putting detail on the nuclear policy. Because at a very helicopter view level, there's a certain genius to nuclear energy, right?
Sure.
Because it's a solution to a problem that will take at least 30 or 40 years to deliver. In the meantime, you don't have to have any other policies for climate because you've got this silver bullet that's just 40 years away. And it allows you to just neutralize the issue without actually having to do anything at all, right? Like, so at an abstract level, at a non-detail based level, it's an act of genius.
Yeah.
But the moment you start putting detail on a nuclear energy plan, it is like who wants a Fukushima in their electorate? Like, literally, there is no great... I mean, if you're thinking that the scare campaign that the No campaign ran on The Voice, which was full of misinformation, was a particularly egregious piece of, lowest common denominator politics, then wait until you see the "do you want a Fukushima in your suburb" shit sheets that the Labor Party are presumably preparing right now.
See, okay, 2 points to make about this, Charles. The first thing is, when this policy was first introduced, do you remember that they were all talking about the smaller, safer reactors? There was this whole model, I think in the US, they were starting to roll this out, the smaller, safer reactors. This was the big thing. You don't need the scary ones that have meltdowns, the large ones. You just need these small kind of fun-sized ones that are safe, that are fine, that you don't have to worry about. They don't work, it turns out. So the small reactors are simply a joke, okay? The SMRs, the small nuclear reactors. Yeah. Should Peter Dutton, if you were advising him, would you suggest that he just keep vague about the size of the reactors, or would you say, no, we're going to need some large ones?
Well, you've got to stay vague. This is the whole point. At no point, the moment you start drilling down on this policy, it is a disaster. Stay vague. He should just go, we need medium-sized ones.
Yeah, and a new technology that isn't out yet, right? You make it like the submarines.
Yeah, that's right. Exactly.
Yep.
It's perfect. You just say, I've invented a new... we should run the whole energy sector on water. I mean, actually, people are doing that. That's the hydrogen dream,
that's true, actually. That's being apparently that's being rolled out and is looking really good, but that's another subject. Well, Charles, okay, so you wouldn't commit to the size. That would be very foolish. But the thing you've alluded to, Charles, with your knowledge of politics, is that saying where you would build the reactors, the places where you put them, that would be an act of electoral self-harm.
Yeah, it's totally right. Yeah, like that is literally, there is no electorate that goes, like, I reckon nuclear is one of those things that everyone secretly deep down wants to happen. At some level, you go, that would be great if, you know, like, I don't know, the North Shore of Sydney could have a nuclear reactor, but you just don't want it near you. Like, I'm happy for it to be at Point Piper. Like, that's completely fine. I'm happy for Adelaide to have nuclear. I'm happy for Melbourne, Brisbane, but maybe not, you know.
I mean,
west of
Adelaide
Sydney
looms large as a possibility, doesn't it?
Yeah. I mean, maybe that's the way we do the rollout, is we choose a city we don't really care about anyway and test out all the, especially if the reactors don't really work.
If you can hear my daughter crying in the background, by the way, that's because she's scared of this.
You know where we test it? Canberra.
Canberra. That's it. If it's safe enough, it can be in Canberra. Well, Charles, here's the thing. The ABC's got a list here of 7 possible sites for these reactors. Because,
oh, no. Are they in marginal seats?
Because
perchance?
what they've done is Peter Dutton came out of Channel 7 this morning and he said what they want to do is replace retiring coal plants with nuclear power stations.
Yeah, sure. We'll be releasing detail shortly in relation to our plan. But as I say, if there's a retiring coal asset, so there's a coal-fired generator that's already got an existing distribution network, the wires and poles are already there to distribute the energy across the network into homes and businesses. That's really what we're interested in.
And not just any, large ones. They've admitted that the only way to get to net zero is by having large nuclear plants. And it makes sense, right? If you're going to build a big nuclear power plant, build it where there's the poles and wires already for large-scale generation.
Transmission is a huge puzzle.
The coalition didn't want to say where this was going to be, but the ABC just went, well, okay, where are some coal-fired power plants that are closing down? And they've got a list here. It's in the federal divisions of Gippsland in Victoria, Hunter in New South Wales, Maranoa and Flynn in Queensland, and O'Connor in Western Australia. Those are the seats. There's also partial closures in Shortland as well in the Central Coast. So some pretty important electorates that now are front and centre, potentially having a large nuclear power plant built in them. That is brave shit, Peter Dutton.
But I actually have a strategy for Peter Dutton to get around the whole, you know, because Labor will clearly run a scare campaign in those electorates and that they'll win them, right? Like scare campaigns just win, especially if you're talking about like nuclear, you know, 3 Mile Island, Chernobyl.
Yeah.
You know, comes to the Hunter. Especially, you know, like the wine growers. Wouldn't the wine growers love a nuclear industry next to them?
Well, this is the thing in the Hunter. The Hunter's the only Labor. Yeah. This is the other amazing thing about this list that they've got here is that they're almost all coalition seats except for Hunter. And full credit to the Nationals MP Colin Boyce, who says that the Callide power station at Biloela in central Queensland, that's the most likely one. That's in his electorate, and he's going, yeah, not a bad idea. So brave. Yeah, so brave. He says, having said that, we'd have to go to the community, engage their thoughts on it before making any decisions. Yes. What do you think the community's going to say?
I'm going to say, well, this is the thing. This is my strategy. I've got a strategy for Peter Dutton, which is what he should say is nuclear is never going to happen. He should explain. He should be sort of like, this is a sophisticated communicator that Peter Dutton and strategy.
He's very good at nuance, isn't he?
You go and reassure each electorate that no, nuclear is just this pipe dream. It doesn't actually make any sense commercially. It's never actually going to happen. If it did happen, you'll all be dead anyway. It's like 2055 is the absolute earliest that it'll happen. And so this is actually just a way for us to, have a sort of climate change policy that means we don't actually have to invest in solar and wind. But also, it's a great way to siphon money out of the government, but it doesn't come with all the other problems that the other methods that they have for siphoning money out of the things. Because if you look at coalition policies, they're usually based on just siphoning money out of the government to give to their mates.
That's exactly what this is, yeah.
Refugee camps, Paladin. You remember that, it was like the company didn't even fucking exist, and then they got $1 billion contract. The car parks. They never built a car park, but they got billions of dollars.
What was the Great Barrier Reef thing with the tiniest office in the world that got like $500 million or something? That was I wish I'd owned that company.
Consultancies. They got like $40 or $38 billion in their last term of government. But the problem with all of those is that people can turn around and go, well, hang on, we didn't get our car park. Hang on, where's our refugee camp to mistreat all the refugees? Whereas with nuclear, there's no deliverable. You don't have to deliver anything because it doesn't make any sense.
Well, there's an obvious solution here, Charles, to try and reassure voters that the reactors won't actually happen. Commissioner of the nuclear program, the man in charge of, the construction and the planning, Scott Morrison. Put Scott Morrison in charge of the nuclear rollout, and it won't happen this century.
Himself.
It's absolutely
he's already
guaranteed.
Appointed himself nuclear.
Nuclear
turn around
commissioner.
and he's already the head of the Nuclear Commission.
More on this in a moment because it's pretty extraordinary what they're saying.
The Chaser Report. News a few days after it happens.
Unsurprisingly, Charles, Anthony Albanese is absolutely salivating at this. He says, I look forward to the debate about where this is going to be. He also says large nuclear reactors, they need to be near populations and they need to be near water. So I think Albo's feeling pretty comfortable with the whole renewables are cheaper argument at this stage.
Yeah, because so I was trying to explain to my son, because my son, it's a generational thing. Right? Like, we all grew up with hippie parents who thought that nuclear was bad, right?
Yes.
But, there is an argument to say if we'd actually started nuclear 30 years ago, we'd be in a much better place carbon-wise now, right? But the thing that is quite interesting about nuclear, so Gen Z and millennials and teenagers all think that nuclear is a great idea, right? Because,
do they?
Yeah.
Carbon.
You look, it's a completely generational divide.
Are they aware
right,
that there's
between-
another kind of pollution that lasts for thousands of years that comes from nuclear power?
Well, but their whole thing is we need to do anything about climate change. We need to do, and they've watched their parents and their grandparents do literally fuck all for 40 years, for the past 40 years. And so their attitude is, well, we don't fucking give a shit.
So they're going to
Just
love
gotta do
this policy
everything.
from Dutton. So this Dutton's on a winner, you're telling me, with the kids.
Yeah, well, yeah. But I was explaining to my son that actually the first 10 years, this is all the projections, even the coalition will tell you this, which is the first 10 years, you don't even start designing the plans for the first 10 years.
Oh, perfect.
First 10 years, you have to skill up your workforce. You got to actually start training your nuclear physicists and your safety officers and your Homer Simpsons who are going to run the safety officers.
Sure.
Blah, blah, blah. And then in 10 years' time, you start going, okay, well, let's sketch out, where to plop this thing down. And so there's a huge lead time in it, during which time solar and wind become cheaper and cheaper every year at a sort of asymptotic rate.
Yeah.
So there is no, it's just not going to happen.
So you're
which
saying,
it makes it.
when you talk about this, what you're really doing is giving solar and wind and all the renewables even more time to become cheaper and obvious. So is this like a secret stealth green campaign by Peter Dutton?
I think that's what we're facing here. I think what Peter
genius.
Dutton has done is he's looked at the success of Max Chandler Mather and he's got in Brisbane, which is where Dutton comes from, and he's gone, how do I get a piece of that action?
He wants to go greener. Well, that's perfect, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because, what he says, he actually agrees with you on this, Charles. He says, you can't compare your old Soviet nuclear power stations. He said it's like comparing a motor vehicle you're driving off the showroom floor in 2024 as opposed to 1954. So he wants the cutting edge nuclear meltdown Fukushima. He doesn't want your sort of 1950s version.
Yeah, because the thing that you want is, with nuclear, what you want is just new designs that have never been tested before.
Yeah.
That's what I want
Be the test bed.
That's what
and I think Peter Dutton's electorate is the perfect place to give it a go. Put your money where your mouth is.
This is how we get rid of the Queensland problem that has plagued Australia for years.
In the seat of Dixon. Well, Queensland problem is in getting rid of Queensland en masse.
Yeah.
Yeah, well.
He's going back to Menzies. It's very foundational to the Liberal Party, the Brisbane line. Remember, Menzies wanted to cede everything north of Brisbane to the Japanese.
Well, just cede it to radiation.
Well, yeah, that's right.
I think North Queensland. Imagine the footballers they'd breed in North Queensland with radiation.
Imagine State of Origin would have a bit of stakes if the players were all irradiated.
So I need to be fair here. The good news about this is that they're going to release their policy. So they've promised. Dutton's promised to get even more specific about locations and design. So they're going to have a big, fat, chunky policy out there. But your theory that this is just a delaying tactic to give renewables more time, is this Dutton's strategy to win back the teal seats?
Yeah, no, because think about it. It's the perfect policy. It is actually the perfect policy because there's a whole constituency of Libs who just don't care about climate change. So that's tick, because it's never going to happen.
Yeah.
But so it's never going to happen. They go, good, it's never going to happen. We don't care about the climate. Then there's a whole group of people who do care about the environment but don't want it to affect any tax or anything that they do.
Yep.
Or they want to pay out from their mates in government whenever the Libs get in. Tick, it'll do that, and then it allows them to win back the teal seats because they say, but we've got the biggest, boldest climate policy of all. Under the wind farm, solar sort of thing, you've got to rebuild all the transmission lines, you've got to build a whole lot of stuff, it's all very complicated, you've got to do stuff right now, blah, 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 blah. Under ours, we have, it's a much bigger, bolder policy. We're going to actually blow up Australia.
It's pretty impressive. I mean, it's bold, it's big, it's expensive, and it also, it's none of this sort of
It's the AUKUS. It's the AUKUS of energy policy.
I mean, this is part of the argument that he's making is that we like nuclear now because we've got AUKUS.
Yeah.
Can't we just get some more submarines and hook them up to the power network? Wouldn't that work? Get a whole bunch of submarines on land.
Just by the by, I should note that you know how there's now a sort of return to sender policy on uranium.
Yeah.
So you know how we sell uranium.
We do. Very good
across the world, especially to the French, ironically. And they send it back, right? So we have a growing stockpile of nuclear waste. Guess where we store that waste, Dom?
I hope it's not at Lucas Heights. That's sort of
no. It's somewhere in South Australia. I don't really care, but where we store it is a temporary holding facility because they haven't worked out where to store it because it's electrical dynamite or actually electrical uranium waste. We can't even work out where to store the nuclear waste that we already have, let alone the nuclear waste that we're going to generate with 7 big nuclear power stations.
How confident are you feeling about your call of Dutton winning the next election, given this? The scare campaign writes itself. You think you can pull it off?
Never underestimate Labor's ability to snatch defeat from the jaws of victory. I think even with the the wind to his back, I'm sure Albo will find a way to trip over in the fourth quarter.
Well, the one thing we can be certain of, though, based on this conversation, is that whichever party wins the next election, we will not have nuclear power in Australia.
That's right. I you know what though? I reckon the best theory is that Dutton's copying Max Chandler Mather. I think that's what's going on.
I think the most well-disguised green I've ever seen. It's an extraordinary piece of subterfuge.
Exactly.
He's been playing the long game here, Charles.
And you know what will happen next? Dutton will grow out his hair. Mark my words.
And wear caftans. That I want to see.
He'll be a long-haired hippie.
Is Peter Dutton a secret green? I think we've answered that question today, Charles. Our gear is from Road. We're part of the Iconoclast Network, and we'll catch you tomorrow.
See ya.